What if the child who cried the most was never broken? What if the child who felt everything too deeply was actually built for something extraordinary? You've seen that child. Maybe you were that child. The one who flinched at loud voices, who noticed when someone in the room was sad before anyone else did. The one teachers called too sensitive. The one parents worried about because the world seemed to hurt them more than it hurt everyone else. And somewhere along the way, someone said the words that would echo for years. You need to toughen up, as if sensitivity were a disease, as if feeling deeply were a defect that needed to be corrected. But what if science and nature told a completely different story? What if the most sensitive among us aren't fragile at all, but are, in fact, the most powerful organisms in the room? There's a flower that explains everything, and its name is the orchid. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, a group of developmental psychologists, led by researchers like Thomas Boyce and Bruce Ellis, made a discovery that would quietly reshape how we understand human potential. They had been studying children, hundreds of them, watching how they responded to stress, to adversity, to chaotic homes, to nurturing ones. And they noticed something that didn't fit the old models. Most children, they found, were like dandelions. Dandelion children are resilient, sturdy, adaptable. You can plant them almost anywhere, in poverty, in noise, in neglect, and they will survive. They'll grow. Not perfectly, not without scars, but they'll push through the concrete and find the sun. They are the majority, and the world celebrates them for their toughness. But then there are the others, a smaller group, maybe 15 to 20% of all children. These kids reacted to everything. Cortisol, the stress hormone, flooded their systems at levels far higher than their peers. Their nervous systems were tuned to a frequency the world wasn't designed for. A harsh word didn't just sting. It burned. A parent's disappointment didn't just sadden them. It shattered something inside. These were the orchid children. And for decades, the scientific community looked at them and saw one thing: vulnerability, fragility, risk. They were wrong. Because here was the part no one expected. When those same orchid children, those hypersensitive, easily overwhelmed, deeply reactive kids, were placed in nurturing environments, in homes with warmth, with emotional attunement, with patient caregivers, they didn't just do well. They didn't just match the dandelion children. They surpassed them in every measurable category: academic performance, emotional intelligence, creative output, social depth, physical health, psychological resilience. The most sensitive children, given the right soil, became the most extraordinary adults. And that is the Orchid Hypothesis. Now let's slow down here, because this isn't just a metaphor. The science behind this is profound, and the parallels with real orchids are almost poetic, as if nature wrote the lesson long before we had the language to understand it. An orchid in the wild is one of the most demanding organisms on Earth. It doesn't grow in dirt like most flowers. It clings to the bark of trees, sometimes hundreds of feet in the air. Its roots hang exposed, absorbing moisture directly from the atmosphere. It needs exact humidity, exact temperature, exact light. Not too much, not too little. A few degrees of change, and it dies. But when conditions are right, an orchid produces flowers that last for months. Structures of such architectural perfection that scientists still don't fully understand how they evolved. Colors that don't exist in any other plant family. Symbiotic relationships with specific pollinators so precise, so intricate, that a single orchid species might depend on a single species of bee, and that bee, in turn, depends on that orchid. It is not a fragile organism. It is a precise one, and that distinction changes everything. Back to our orchid children. What researchers like Boyce and later J. Belsky, with his concept of differential susceptibility, discovered was that these children's brains are not weaker. They are more permeable. Think of it this way. Most people's nervous systems have a kind of filter, a screen door that lets some of the world in and keeps the rest out. Dandelion children have a fine mesh. They feel the breeze, they register the temperature, but the storm doesn't get inside. Orchid children? Their screen door is wide open. Everything gets in. Every tone of voice. Every flicker of facial expression. the energy of a room when they walk into it, the unspoken tension between two people who say they're fine but aren't. And this is where the tragedy has lived for so long. Because in harsh environments, in homes with conflict, with emotional coldness, with unpredictability, that wide-open door becomes a wound. Everything toxic floods in. The orchid child absorbs the chaos, internalizes it, carries it in their body. Studies have shown that orchid children raised in high-stress environments have significantly higher rates of anxiety, depression, behavioral disorders, and even chronic physical illness compared to dandelion children in those same environments. They don't just suffer, they suffer more. And this is where the world stopped reading the research. This is where the narrative froze. Sensitive children are at risk. Full stop. Headline written. Case closed. But the researchers kept going. Because when they looked at the other end of the spectrum, orchid children raised in supportive, emotionally rich environments, the data was stunning. These children scored higher on cognitive tests. Not marginally higher, but significantly. They showed deeper empathy, more creative problem solving, stronger emotional regulation. Yes, regulation, not suppression. They formed more meaningful relationships. They reported higher life satisfaction well into adulthood. The same biology that made them vulnerable to pain, made them equally open to beauty, to love, to meaning. It was never a flaw. It was a dial turned all the way up. Dr. Elaine Aron, who has spent decades studying what she calls highly sensitive persons, or HSPs, describes it as having a nervous system that processes sensory data more deeply. Not more emotionally, as people often misunderstand, but more thoroughly. The orchid child doesn't just hear music. They feel it reverberate in their chest. They don't just see a sunset. They ache with it. They don't just notice that their friend is sad. They carry that sadness home with them, turning it over in their minds, trying to understand it, try to fix it. And here is where the nature metaphor becomes almost unbearably beautiful. Because orchids in the wild don't just survive in perfect conditions. They become keystone species. They hold ecosystems together. They form relationships with fungi beneath the surface, mycorrhizal networks, trading nutrients, sharing resources, connecting trees across entire forests. The orchid doesn't just bloom for itself. It sustains everything around it. Sound like anyone you know? The friend who always listens. The artist who captures what others can't express. The leader who sees what no one else sees. The tension, the potential, the fracture in the foundation before it cracks. Those are orchid adults, and the world has been calling them too much for their entire lives. So what does this mean practically, honestly, for those of us who recognize ourselves in this? For the adults who were once orchid children? For the parents raising one right now? It means the most important shift isn't in the child. It's in the environment. You don't fix an orchid by making it tougher. You don't harden it against the world. You change the conditions. You give it what it actually needs, not what dandelions need, not what the standard advice says, but what it needs. And in human terms, this translates into something simple but radical. Emotional safety, not overprotection, not shielding from all discomfort, but the profound, consistent message: what you feel is real. What you feel is valid. And I am here while you feel it. Studies from the University of California and the University of British Columbia have shown that orchid children who receive what researchers call sensitive parenting, caregivers who are attuned, responsive, and emotionally present, don't just recover from early hardship. They develop what psychologists call vantage sensitivity, the ability to benefit disproportionately from positive experiences. Where a dandelion child might enjoy a walk in the forest, an orchid child is transformed by it. Where a dandelion child appreciates a good teacher, an orchid child's entire trajectory is altered by one. The leverage is extraordinary. A single relationship, a single environment, a single season of being truly seen, and the orchid doesn't just grow, it becomes. And for those of you watching this who are orchid adults, who survived environments that weren't built for you, I want to say something that no one may have ever said clearly enough. You're not damaged. You were starved. There is a difference between a broken organism and a starving one. A broken orchid cannot be repaired, but a starving orchid, one that was denied light, denied moisture, denied warmth. That orchid, the moment it receives what it needs, blooms with a ferocity that shocks even experienced gardeners. It is not too late. It is never too late to change the soil you're standing in. And nature itself offers the therapy. Research published in Environmental Health Perspectives, in Frontiers in Psychology, in dozens of peer-reviewed journals confirms what orchid people have always intuitively known. Natural environments reduce cortisol. They lower amygdala reactivity. They restore the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for regulation, perspective, and calm. For a dandelion person, a walk in the woods is pleasant. For an orchid person, it can be medicine, because the wide-open nervous system that absorbs pain from the world also absorbs beauty from the world. The sound of water over stones, the geometry of ferns, the silence between bird songs. These aren't just nice. For an orchid mind, they are restorative at a cellular level. You were built to feel deeply, and nature was built to be felt. There is a species of orchid called Dendrophylax lindinii, the ghost orchid. It grows in the deep swamps of Florida and Cuba. It has no leaves, no visible means of photosynthesis. For most of the year, it looks like nothing. A tangle of gray-green roots on a tree trunk. People walk past it every day and see nothing worth stopping for. And then, once a year, sometimes only for a few days, it produces a single white flower. A bloom so rare, so hauntingly beautiful, that botanists have spent entire careers searching for it. Photographers have waited weeks in swamps, in humidity, in darkness, just for the chance to see it open. It was never nothing. It was always becoming. And so are you. If you've spent your life being told that you feel too much, that you think too deeply, that you're too affected by the world around you, hear this. You're not too much. You are an orchid in a world that was built for dandelions. And that is not a tragedy. That is a superpower waiting for the right conditions. Find your light. Choose your soil carefully. Surround yourself with those who understand that your depth is not a burden. It is the rarest thing in any room you enter. And when you finally bloom, and you will, don't bloom quietly. Bloom so fully that the world has no choice but to stop and look. If this story found you at the right moment, if something in it felt like it was written for you, then maybe this channel is the kind of soil you've been looking for. The plant mind is a place where nature and the human mind meet, where we explore not just how the world grows, but how we grow. If you'd like to continue this journey, subscribe. Stay for a while. Let these ideas take root. And if you know someone, a sensitive soul, an orchid child, a person who has always felt like they were too much, share this with them. Sometimes a single message, arriving at the right time, is all the light an orchid needs.